Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Wednesday, January 29th, 2025, and today we are going to be talking about the state of Michigan now having a brand new open race set to take place this coming 2026 midterm election. Senator Gary Peters, a longtime serving incumbent from the state of Michigan, announcing he's not running, leaving this primary field wide and open as Governor Gretchen Whitmer announces that she is not running for this Senate seat and instead focusing her time elsewhere. She leaves office in 2026 and has a highly anticipated presidential bid, largely the reason, so it seems, that she may not be running for this Senate seat here. But with the Gary Peters departure, it shakes up the math for the 2026 Senate elections. And a big reason for that is because these Senate elections have been looked at by the Democratic Party as a potential opportunity to set up future election victories on the national level when it comes down to the Senate majority. Right now, the Democratic Party holds the minority status in the U.S. Senate at a map of 53 to 47. Democrats recently had contested a Senate election in Michigan, which they won by a margin of just 0.3%, another race without an incumbent, though Republicans won a total of 53 seats, holding roughly a 6-seat advantage over the Democratic Party. And again, looking at the 2026 Senate election races, what are we looking at here? Well, Democrats have very limited opportunities, especially if their end goal is to win the Senate majority. The map here isn't necessarily conducive to Democratic victories, and especially not a Democratic majority in just around a year and a half. It would be very difficult to see, and honestly, very impractical for Democrats to win back the Senate majority. But looking at where the opportunities would be, historically speaking, maybe Democrats would have looked at states like Iowa and Ohio. But these states should be entirely written off by Democrats if they are focused on states that are actually going to be the ones that they can win in future races. Other than that, you would take a look at states maybe like North Carolina, but a lot of it would be defense. North Carolina and Maine would be the offensive states, but a lot of the defense would be in states like Georgia and Colorado and New Hampshire and Minnesota and Virginia and, yes, even Michigan, especially Michigan out of almost all of them. Georgia and Michigan were expected to be the two closest races of this 2026 midterm elections, regardless of what was happening on the national level. It's very possible that North Carolina finds its way in there, and maybe even the state of Maine. But ultimately speaking, my Siri just went off. Sorry about that. But, ultimately speaking, what we're looking at here is that Democrats are trying to find a bunch of different ways that they could set up a pathway for the 2026 and 2028 Senate elections. And so far, it relies on consistency in all of these races being together. And what I mean by that is, if you remember back in the 2022 midterm elections, Democrats were able to make sure that one thing happened throughout all of their Senate races through the election, and that was that every single incumbent ran for re-election. And while there were limited exceptions in the races here, for instance, a notable one would be in the state of Vermont, Peter Welch, he decided that he was going to leave office there. But other than that, really, we weren't working with many retirements besides, a longtime serving member of the United States Senate. Besides that, right, we're not talking about anything. Or Patrick Leahy resigned. Peter Welch replaced him. Confusing up the P names here, but still. That was the only major retirement on the Democratic side. There was practically nothing else of significance on the Democratic side besides primaries that had taken place previously that, Democrats talked about for this time around. They had one contested primary in Pennsylvania, but then even it was a Republican incumbent who was also retiring. The Republicans, on the other hand, had retirements. Alabama really didn't matter, but it led to Katie Britt, who might be a future party leader, so that'll be a conversation for way later down the road, 2028 maybe, right? Roy Blunt was retiring, didn't really matter, but Richard Burr in North Carolina mattered, right? Rob Portman in Ohio mattered, right? Pat Toomey in Pennsylvania clearly mattered because Democrats won that race and flipped a seat from red to blue. But again, I ask you, what was the, whole thing here for the Democrats? Only one retirement. And it was only notable because of it being a super senior ranking member of the Democratic establishment. But besides that, it really didn't matter. But now we have our first retirement coming from a swing state. And now the floodgates unleashed, right? All of these Democrats are now looking to this race, especially again, as Gretchen Whitmer says, I will not be running for this Senate race, which I have thoughts on its own, but we'll talk about that, in an analysis of 2028 contenders. Gretchen Whitmer, I think, very much has a lot lined up for her, but I think she would have made an even bigger name for herself had she been serving in a Senate capacity. It would have been really great, I think, as a story to be told about serving in an executive authority as governor, then also serving as senator, yada, yada, yada. People like to talk about different things in different ways, but still, I think it would have been relevant and would have been helpful to her experience to run for president. But still, she's very accomplished and very well can run for president on her own and might be able to dedicate more time if she's not worried about traveling back and forth between Washington, D.C. But looking at Michigan's Senate race, who do we have? Those who have publicly expressed interest. We have two state senators, and Pete Buttigieg, who was mayor of South Bend, Indiana. And everybody here, if you're watching this video, you know him, Department of Transportation Secretary, but also some other candidates that are considering running as well. And there's a long list. A number of U.S. reps who might be seeking higher office, might be trying to move up from the position in the House of Representatives. Same thing as Elisa Slotkin, going from a House district to Senate. The Lieutenant Governor of Michigan is also considering running. He might decide not to run for governor, but instead run for Senate. So there's a bunch of different names being thrown out here, but a lot of them, Pete Buttigieg would be a huge fundraiser. But the question is, can he win a general election? And it would be seen as carpetbagging. Yes, he's from Indiana. It's neighboring to Michigan, but the Midwest is very particular about their types of candidates when it comes down to carpetbagging. Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, you can actually find studies that show, comically enough, as much as we talk about this may or may not matter, in these three states in particular, you find that the voting population has a super majority of its voting base coming from people who have stayed in the state throughout their entire lives and actually sour on carpetbaggers. You see that in Pennsylvania with Dr. Oz, got a lot of pushback, even though he was from a neighboring state, New Jersey. It was a big reason why he lost that Senate race. But again, just looking at Michigan, this has presented Democrats an opportunity, yes, to bring in fresh blood and bring in somebody new to Washington, D.C., but it opens up a lot of risks. Even Gary Peters, as the incumbent back in 2020, when Biden was winning the state by 2.8%, only won the Senate race by 1.7%. We found here that in the case of Lisa Slotkin, she was able to outrun Kamala Harris by a pretty notable amount, but take a look at the drop-off in the amount of votes. There were hundreds of thousands of voters, I mentioned this in my video earlier today, hundreds of thousands of voters across the nation who voted for Trump and voted for nobody else. Michigan is a perfect example of why Donald Trump being a turnout machine for himself can sometimes be detrimental to those down the ballot. Because in the Michigan Senate race here, Mike Rogers received just 2.69 million votes. Donald Trump received 2.81 million votes. And while there were undeniably crossover voters, no candidate reached the level of even the losing candidate, Kamala Harris, at 2.73 million votes. There were definitively significantly less votes, significant enough because the margin here is 0.3%, so I say significantly less votes in the Senate race than in the presidential. Gary Peters back in 2020, that doesn't, tell us good news for the Democrats in 2026. This is a risk. And while Gary Peters, let's look at his age, I actually don't know what it is currently 66 years old, he in theory could run for re-election, but he is choosing not to. Maybe he's seeing writing on the wall that says he's on his way out. Maybe he just wants to leave. But regardless, though, the Democratic Party is not guaranteed to win this race. What we saw there with Patrick Leahy in Vermont was that it was pretty much a wash because no Republican, not even the incumbent governor Phil Scott, was going to be able to win that Senate race for the GOP. It didn't matter. Whoever won the primary was winning the general. That is not necessarily the case in the Senate race in Michigan. And although Democrats do have both Senate seats right now, we remember Pennsylvania back in 2024. That was just months ago. We remember what it looks like when a campaign that has been running on, very strong Democrats in the past, and Bob Casey too, had been a very strong Democrat. His race before this, he won by double digits. Now he's losing to Dave McCormick, who couldn't even win a primary 2 years before. We are talking about certain different sets of circumstances here, but Dave McCormick winning the Senate race in the state of Pennsylvania, huge consequences for the Democratic Party, speaks to the point that nothing is guaranteed. And so Democrats looking at this race, yes, an opportunity for fresh blood, but maybe that fresh blood is a little bit more red than they'd like, and Republicans might win that Senate race here. So, all in all, 2026 Senate race, vacancy opened up by Gary Peters. It will be one to watch. The Democrats, the Republicans, we will see who jumps into this race, who is excited and who is, really investing into it. Because as of right now, the 2026 races, for as much as they are going to be races that Democrats can do well in, and will look to say, this is our resistance, this is our pushback on the incumbent president. it is very possible that it also shows them some defeats. And this Michigan Senate race, with the lack of an incumbent, it is really fascinating to me. The Democrats were able to lock rank in 2022, hold all their Democrats together. Think about Nevada, Arizona, Georgia, Wisconsin, right? All these races, or not Wisconsin, rather. We're able to win Pennsylvania despite not having an incumbent. All these different things, all these different races that people were saying it's going to be competitive. Throw in Washington, throw in New Hampshire. People who could have reasonably said my state is blue enough, but I don't want to be the one who loses re-election. All of them said we're coming in together. We're going to win these races together. Gary Peters is the first to say I'm on my way out. And while I don't think Democrats, can say he should be blamed for this or there should be any type of pushback, what I am going to say is this. The 2022 midterm elections looked far more brutal in expectation for the Democratic Party, which is why it's surprising to say and see that so many Democrats were willing to be at that point and say, you know what, I'm going to stay in the race. When it comes down to Gary Peters and potentially for some more Democrats in the 2026 midterms, there may be ulterior motives as to why they're deciding to back out. But with Whitmer out of this race, this is truly going to be a very contentious primary that might allow some weaker candidates to win a multi-way race, or better candidates to win a more dominated race. We will see, because only time will tell, but as of right now, our first close race of the 2026 election, what was already going to be one of the closest races of the cycle, just got even closer. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the top right of your screen, there's a video for you to watch and a playlist for my 2024 post-election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.